My next speaker is Alan Foster, and I guess you've all been, a lot of you have been interested in the whole UAP, UFO phenomenon, and eagerly is waiting the latest news as I am. So a big round of applause for Alan Foster.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So just to let you know, my name's Alan Foster. I'm a writer, researcher and lecturer on UFOs, crop formations, environmental and spiritual issues. I've been studying this subject for about 50 years now, since I had a UFO encounter in April 1973, and that stimulated me to start looking at this particular reality or realities. I've worked in various industries, including 19 years in the airline industry, some of that working as a manager of an airline operation that provided the commercial transport for the US military. That was in the UK and then also in the Mediterranean. And I've worked in airline operations at different international airports over many, many years. So the talk today is basically in three parts. So initially I want to highlight the work of the UK pilots reporting UAP project. Then I want to move into the sort of central area, which is basically the updates or the developments within the UAP world. And then finally lead towards the consciousness, which is, you know, probably more relevant to us here. So it's like in three parts. So initially, the pilots reporting UAP. This was set up earlier this year by Gary Heseltine, who's the editor of UFO Truth magazine, along with myself, as UAP researcher, but with quite an extensive airline background. Dave Hodrian, who's the chairman of Birmingham UFO Group, and Chris Gaffney, who is a pilot, light aircraft pilot, and a researcher in Ireland as well. So what we were doing, the point of setting this up was to have to recognise the fact that there is an air safety issue for pilots in regarding UFOs and UAPs, and this is through the history. You all know about this. This is a regular occurrence. Pilots should be allowed to speak about interactions with objects. In the normal course of events, that would be natural. So basically, just to highlight this, at UK Pilots Reporting UAP, we are a team of researchers dedicated to studying and documenting UAP sightings reported by British pilots. In addition to pilots, we also encourage other aircrew and aviation employees, including radar operators and air traffic controllers, to come forward, securing the knowledge that their identities and careers can be protected if they wish to be an anonymous source. So we collaborate with pilots, aviation organisations and government agencies to gather, investigate and analyse data, ensuring the highest level of accuracy and credibility. As with current developments in the United States, where they've also got Americans for Safe Aerospace, we firmly believe that there are clear air safety implications for UK pilots who experience UAP-related encounters, and that there should be coordinated lines of reporting for military or civil, and transparency regarding these events. So we understand the implications of the decades-long era of stigma surrounding the subject, but believe it is receding, as it is now the subject of intense interest by scientists and the media, of course, who are finally able to get involved in UAP data-driven research. So you're all aware that it's sort of increasing big times in the States. Now, so this is a photograph of myself in 2009, working in airline operations at this point as the turnaround manager of that particular flight. And the point of that is that this has given me a great opportunity to speak directly to pilots and airline crew, air traffic controllers, over many years to talk about the UFO subject. And I've had some incredible cases come from them. But also, with I've given sort of hundreds of lectures to community groups and professional organisations about this subject and subjects, and the incredible cases that I've had are quite astounding, and from people who feel they can't speak out about this subject, who then, under those conditions, and this is like, Royal British Legion or Royal Naval Association, Royal Air Force Association, even WI, so they suddenly feel they can actually talk about it among their colleagues. So I've had some incredible cases that have been given me like that. So what I want to do, I just want to highlight 3 cases that I've been given where I've spoken directly to the airline pilots. And these are 3 incredible cases as well. So one of them is this. This was basically, I spoke to a retired squadron leader from the RAF who in July 1966 was based at RAF Akrotiri, which is in southern Cyprus. And he was the duty officer, the duty pilot that day. It was a beautiful, clear day. He said that basically there was this cone-shaped, sort of silver cone-shaped object moving very, very slowly high over Cyprus. So he was told to scramble the aircraft and go and look at it. So he took off, started flying towards it. He went 10,000 feet, 20,000 feet, 30,000 feet. And he said, basically, we're not getting any closer to this object. So he asked if he could go, if he could have permission to go supersonic, which they gave him. So he opened up full afterburner on this jet, blasted it up, and he said he went past its official ceiling, which was basically at 40,000 feet, right up to 60,000 feet. At this time, the Lightning was probably one of the most powerful jets on Earth at the time. So as he went up to that point, the aircraft went into a stall. Basically, the air was so thin that one of the engines flamed out. So he said he went into a stall, and he was close to this object, but it was still sort of way above him. He looked at it. It was like silver cone-shaped object. He couldn't see any windows. He said there is no way was that made on Earth. And it was actually at 168,000 feet above Earth, and they estimated it was about half a mile across, this object. It's absolutely massive, like a city ship. The aircraft fell back to Earth. By about 30,000 feet, he was able to start up the second engine, came back to base, went through the usual process where he went through the debriefing, wing commander, and was told he was not allowed to talk about this subject. So I'm grateful that he did later, as many others do, particularly after retirement. Now, another case, I'd given a talk to a Royal British Legion group, and I spoke to Captain David Wilmot. I gave the talk, and afterwards he actually stood up and spoke briefly about the case that he'd had in front of his colleagues. And then I met him afterwards to cover the finer details. An amazing case as well. So on the 25th of July 1967, he was flying this very aircraft, the British Eagle Airways flight from JFK to Heathrow. He had about 120 passengers on board. And while he was flying, one of these objects, or very similar to it, a plasma-based craft, approached the aircraft and was following them off their port wing. In fact, in the talk that I gave, I showed this, which to me is one of the most profound UFOs that we've seen on Earth. They're highly advanced, organic, sentient thinking technology, way beyond sort of metal technology. But this stimulated him to want to talk about the case. So so what happened is that they were following the aircraft. They were speaking on air traffic radar with Shannon. They're about halfway across the Atlantic, south of Greenland. He said suddenly 2 F-100 Super Sabres suddenly approached, and it was dark, it was just getting light in the eastern horizon. And he said he didn't know where they came from because he didn't know of a military base in southern Greenland. But anyway, they were speaking on air traffic frequency as well, so he could hear the pilots. And they started to approach towards the UFO. Suddenly the UFO tilted a 30-degree angle and then just went whoosh, straight off into space. He said they tried to chase, but of course they couldn't. They had to then peel away. Now, what is interesting about this case is about 3 hours later, they landed at Heathrow. They went back to their office to do the usual debrief, or unusual debrief. 4 men turned up, guys in suits, and he said one of them was, they felt was MOD, and the other 3 were Americans. So within 3 hours of this incident, you've got 3 Americans turning up airside at an airport, an international airport in Britain. You know, it shows that this is 1967, that the Americans have been very much in control of this over, well, certainly since Roswell, as we well know. Now, thirdly, this is the third case I want to talk about where pilots that I've actually spoken to directly. This is Captain Ray Bowyer, a wonderful gentleman who had an incredible encounter. This was in April of 2007. He was flying with Aurigny Air Services, one of these aircraft. It's a Trilander, from Southampton to Alderney in the Channel Islands, when he saw 2 massive, mile-across disc-shaped objects not far from Guernsey. And he saw it, the passengers saw them, the crew of Blue Islands Airlines saw them, and these objects were being tracked on Jersey air traffic control radar. Now, he ended up speaking openly about this in local media, and as this example, in the Jersey Evening Post, and also in the Guernsey newspaper. And I think because it came out in local media, it was then, you know, taken more seriously elsewhere, or, you know, spoken of. And he actually ended up speaking on, I think, the news at 9 or 10. An amazing guy. I gave a lecture with him, not only because of my UAP research, but airline background. A really honest and trustworthy guy. But at the same time, I was actually working in airline operations at Bristol Airport, and we used to dispatch the Aurigny flights. So again, I had the opportunity. I ended up speaking to the pilots about him in this case, you know, saying, you know, what do you think of him? And they were all so complimentary, saying what an honest and trustworthy guy he was. So I was really impressed with that. And once again, had this opportunity. So all of these I've spoken to, you know, and you look in their eyes when they're telling you their stories, you know, these people are not making this up. But that's just 3 cases, 2 of which involve like nearly mile across, half mile or mile across objects, so massive city ship type craft. So there's way more than the 30-foot or 50-foot across objects that are appearing in our skies. Now, this is Command Sergeant Major Bob Dean. He was an intelligence analyst at the SHAPE headquarters, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe in Brussels. He was there in the early 60s. And he said that in 1964, he had a very high level of top secret clearance. He came across what was the assessment document, and he said this was the assessment of the extraterrestrial situation on Earth for those with a need to know. And of course, we all know that, you know, often prime ministers or presidents don't have a need to know. He said that within this report, there were, at that time in 1964, they had evidence for at least a dozen different ET races interacting with the human race. And basically, they fell into 3 categories, a bit like humans, really, in a way. There were those that were negative, that had a negative intent towards us and were using us physically or our resources. There were others that were here in a more observational capacity, particularly at the moment as we're going through such incredible changes. Thirdly, there were those that were here in a more benevolent capacity. So again, it was a very complex subject. But I show this sort of montage here to give you an idea of how complex this is. Now here, most of you are fully familiar with this, of course. So you have like the reptilians as either physical beings or in some cases interdimensional negative entities. You've got the greys, either the taller greys or the shorter greys, that in some cases it's believed that the shorter greys may be automatons. Up on the top left you've got the human types, sometimes called the Nordics. And it's interesting that in the assessment document they were more concerned about the human types because they knew they could walk in the corridors of power like the White House or the Pentagon, and you wouldn't know they were ET, so they were concerned about that. You've got light beings. Up at the top right, which is rather ironic, I actually show an angel. not because an angel is an extraterrestrial, but just to sort of highlight how complex this subject is. And this debate is hotting up and will hot up as to whether angels are ETs. It's going to get sort of quite messy, the debates that are going to happen regarding that. For me, I will state categorically, and it's so important we know, that angels are divine messengers from God, basically in spirit, that they come here to help people on a soul level at the pivotal moments within their existence and within their life, and of course, obviously, when they pass over as well. So it's really important we understand that there's a spiritual element to the angels. They are not the same as ETs. And then down at the bottom right, I show the sort of the military side of this, where the Black Ops have been working with some ETs, in fact, possibly even doing some of the abductions, where they're called military abductions, MILABs. So again, there's a very nefarious side that goes on here, which is part of what's being restricted from us finding out about that. But one of the most important things that, or the most frequent things that happen regarding UFO interactions is the nuclear issue. Over the decades, it's very, very common. This is the front cover of a book, Faded Giant, which was written by Robert Salas, Captain Robert Salas. He was the launch control officer at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. And in March 1967, again, 67 was an amazing year. There were so many cases all around the world. A UFO hovered over his base, and he basically had 10 nukes, nuclear missiles, all of which deactivated one by one. He said basically that could not happen because we had backup generators and backup systems. It happened at another site as well where another 10 nukes were deactivated. So as you can well imagine, this was of great concern behind the scenes, even though they sort of said that this didn't happen. But he thankfully was another one of those brave people that spoke out about it. This sort of led on to the disclosures that happened at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. These are really pivotal. The first one up on top left, on the 9th of May 2001, that one was set up by Dr. Stephen Greer, which again I'm sure many of you are aware of. There were over 20 people from high levels of military and government, pilots, that spoke out in front of the world's media about their own personal experiences of UFOs, ETs, also their awareness of some technology that's been back-engineered and seeded into mainstream industry through government contracting programs. Technology such as silicon chip, fiber optics, night vision, Kevlar, the body armor, lasers, microcircuitry, etc. A lot of that fed into mainstream industry. Now, the next big one happened on the 12th of November 2007, and I wish I had time to tell you about all of those. One of them on the right off screen is Captain Ray Bowyer. So this was later that year after his encounter, so he was actually invited to go and speak at this disclosure, which is really good. They were pushing for open congressional hearings so the people of the world can know that UFOs and ETs exist. Then in September 2010, there was another one where testimony was given at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., that indicates numerous missile installations have been shut down by unknown objects under intelligent control. And then on the right-hand side is another disclosure, again at the National Press Club. This is just a few yards down the road from the White House, where some presidents give addresses here. In this case, there were 40, I'll show you there you go, that's a bit better. There were 40 people from high levels of military and government, science, researchers, pilots, that were giving testimony in front of former congressman and a senator, again, pushing for open congressional hearings. And the gentleman giving testimony in the middle at the moment, that's Captain Robert Salas, so again talking about the nukes being deactivated. So then moving on, we then had this sort of pivotal moment basically in December 2017 when the New York Times released that article highlighting the fact that although the Pentagon says there's no such thing, they acknowledged that there was a program called the ATIP program, which stands for Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program, that had been still looking into the UFO reality. This is the point when they started to change the name to, or the acronym to UAP, initially as Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, because they didn't want the connotation connecting UFOs to aliens. And this is where they started to show the images from the FLIR, the forward-looking infrared radar images from Navy pilots of the Tic Tac image and the other one, like this one here, of course, that you've all seen. This one was from 2015. The object was called Gimbal because it could rotate on its central axis. And then the others as well, the Go Fast and the Tic Tac object, but just going back to that. So this related to the incidents particularly that happened in 2004 during the exercise off California with the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier and Princeton and other ships, where they were monitoring these objects. And the physics that they were showing was sort of off the scale, basically. So I'll just read you these. So basically, for several days around the 14th of November 2004, the US Navy Tic Tac UAP interactions off California, there are accounts of UAP pulling 700 up to 1350 G-forces. The maximum for a human is about 8. So, basically these objects were doing instantaneous right-hand turns, instantaneous acceleration, or dropping and stopping. So incredible G-forces. They were traveling from instantaneous acceleration, traveling from point A to point B over many miles in a second, with speeds from 13,000 to 100,000 miles an hour, but with no sonic boom as well. One object seen by the FA-18 pilot, Commander David Fravor, it flew in a blink to their combat assembly point, which was predetermined and secret to the air wing. So before they did their exercise, they always highlight a point in space, and a 3D space in the sky where they'll meet in the event of them needing to come back to escape, or the entry point. And this, of course, applies in warfare as well. They could stop in mid-air instantaneously, and their ability to go from very high altitude straight down to the sea and back to altitude again at incredible speeds with no obvious signs of propulsion. Senior Chief Kevin Day, who was the senior radar specialist and radar trainer on the USS Princeton, which is the ship in the foreground with the cutting-edge military technology and radars. They were tracking multiple objects over several days, so not just the Tic Tac bit. One object went from 80,000 feet down to the sea and instantaneously stopped in under 1 second. So that's a speed at least 52,000 miles an hour. And further evidence indicates that the UAP do not seem to be affected by the forces of gravity or air or water pressure on the structure of the object, and therefore are able to maneuver in abnormal ways. Quite a lot of pilots have spoken out about objects approaching their aircraft, and they sort of duck, and then they expect to go through the air wake, the turbulence that we know, and there isn't any, and it's sort of quite a shock, particularly to a pilot. So this is a screen grab from an interview with Senior Chief Kevin Day, the radar specialist from the USS Princeton, interviewed by Tim Ventura. It's really good. It's worth seeing because, I mean, the thing I like about Kevin Day is his emotions. When he talks about this, he's really emotional about it, and you really sort of respect that, and how it affects people, and even, their future careers are affected when they start speaking out about this subject. So then, forgive me for sort of bombarding with you with a lot of information at the moment. This is because the brief was to talk about the current developments in UAP, but it does lead towards consciousness and more relevant subjects. But just so you're aware, for those that are not aware, in August 2020, the US Department of Defense established the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force to improve its understanding of and gain insight into the nature and origins of UAPs, and to detect, analyse and catalogue UAPs that could potentially pose a threat to US national security. A year later, on the 25th of June 21, the historic preliminary assessment of UAP document was released. It says on page 3, most of the UAP reported from 2004 to 21 probably do represent physical objects, given that a majority of UAP were registered across multiple sensors, which includes radar, infrared, electro-optical, weapons seekers and visual observation. So again, more than just a fuzzy blob in the distance that somebody's seen. And on page 5, that they can maneuver abruptly or move at considerable speed. So this was sort of rare that they're talking about stuff that fits with our understanding of what UFOs do anyway. And this corresponds to the open testimony of the pilots and radar specialists that had seen these things. And then the former head of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP, which was the predecessor unit to UAPTF, Lou Elizondo, referred to the UAP as having erratic flight behaviour, unlike anything seen before, defying all logic and our current understanding of aerodynamics, and behaving in ways that aren't physically normal. So then this led to, I showed you the disclosures that happened earlier on, where they were pushing for open congressional hearings. And then at last, in May of 2022, they had a very historic open congressional hearing. And by open, it means that it's live streamed, so the public can actually watch this. It was fairly weak, exactly as you expect. They were only talking about incidents from 2004 onwards, and so nothing like Roswell or anything like that, but it was still historic for them to discuss this. And then, as more and more pilots and military personnel were speaking out, a year later, in May 23, then this led to an open meeting by NASA. It was a 4-hour meeting, and in a way, if you look at the faces of the people there in NASA, I think it says it all, really. They definitely don't like talking about UFOs or UAP. And in fact, it was sort of proved because one of the gentlemen within that said that the astronauts are not briefed on this subject, and they don't know about the subject, which of course we all know is not true. Many of the astronauts have spoken out about UFOs. From Gordon Cooper, Buzz Aldrin, Edgar Mitchell, Story Musgrave, Scott Carpenter. These are all the revered astronauts. With mainstream astronomy, they revere these people, and yet they don't mention the fact that they're all openly and have openly spoken about the UFO reality. In this case, this is Gordon Cooper, who said this in 14 January 1997. I know other astronauts share my feelings, and we know the government is sitting on hard evidence of UFOs. And by hard evidence, he doesn't mean just a fuzzy picture. He's talking about actual technology craft. Gordon Cooper also spoke about the fact that he himself, in 1957, had been at Edwards Air Force Base in California, and a UFO had actually landed on the base. It was filmed. He saw the film footage, and it was good. Then an aircraft came in that had flown in from Washington. The canister of film was taken back to Washington, and he was asked, what happened to it? He said, how would I know? This is so compartmentalized that you'd never find out where that film went. But again, he had seen it, and it was, good footage of this UFO on the base. And, that's open testimony, so NASA should know about that, of course. Then the big one, which again Andy mentioned yesterday, and most of you are aware of course, is the whistleblower David Grusch, who was high-level U.S. intelligence officer, interviewed by the brilliant investigative journalist Ross Coulthard, the Australian investigator. He's really good, and David Grusch basically acknowledged that craft and bodies of non-human intelligence have been recovered. And this was on the 11th of June 2023. Now again, in this country, obviously very little is covered, but in the States there was a flurry of news media about this. So, you know, most people in the States are fully aware of this, or these allegations. This then led to this congressional hearing, as I say, which Andy had said yesterday, and it is worth seeing if you ever get the chance. It's you've got the three gentlemen here that are under oath giving testimony of their awareness of this subject. In the middle is David Grusch, former US military intelligence official, talking about these subjects. On the left is Lieutenant Ryan Graves, who was a former US Navy FA-18 pilot, who he said they were flying off the East Coast, and that basically these objects, or unusual UAP objects, they were seeing them nearly every day. This was a regular occurrence. In one case, he mentioned about an object that flew really close to between his aircraft and another aircraft, right between the two aircraft. And he said it was basically this ball, this translucent see-through ball, inside of which was a grey cube, the corners of the cube touching the edges on the inside of the sphere. So, but for them, no obvious signs of propulsion. He also set up, after this, he set up Americans for Safe Aerospace, similar to what I was talking about earlier on with the UK pilots reporting UAP. Where again, you know, they're hoping that pilots will come forward and openly give testimony of incidents that they've had. And then on the right is Commander David Fravor. He's the sort of the well-known FA-18 pilot from November 2004 that actually saw the Tic Tac objects performing those unbelievable manoeuvres. Now again, I will just say in brackets, there is a possibility that some of that may be our own advanced technology to confuse matters or to steer things in a certain direction. So that has to be acknowledged, I think, as we look at this. And this is, former US intelligence official David Grusch says under oath that the US government is in possession of UFOs and non-human bodies. You know, so this is big stuff. Again, researchers like here, you know, we've been looking at this for decades, but for it to come out in mainstream is pretty powerful. And then, so this led to the Senate leader, Chuck Schumer, who is a powerful figure within the Senate, filing the UAP Disclosure Act, so that a lot of this stuff was spoken about, information was given, but basically it was gutted by a small number of powerful Republicans. And I'll just highlight some of the stuff that was in that because it's really important. So at the end of 23, Senate leader Chuck Schumer introduced an amendment aimed at unveiling long-standing covert programs that have endeavoured to reverse engineer craft of unknown or non-human origin. The amendment was designed for inclusion in the National Defence Authorization Act for this year. Behind the scenes, powerful forces were at work to water down this amendment by the intelligence and defence contractors who are suspected of being involved in a decades-long campaign to deny knowledge of UFO crash retrievals and reverse engineering programs. And of the original 64 pages of legislation, it was pared down to just 19, and almost all of the significant provisions were removed from the final bill, such as gone is the Independent Review Board, which wanted to see the disclosure of significant UAP information and materials. Gone is the use of eminent domain, which for them means it would have enabled the US federal government to take back any materials or biological evidence of unknown or non-human origin. Gone are improved whistleblower and witness protections, and that was important because a lot of these people who want to speak out, you know, they've signed security acts and stuff, so they want to know that they're not going to be, you know, arrested or imprisoned for speaking out, and there are many of them. And then gone are the subpoena powers and an amnesty provision for defence contractors and others in possession of UAP-related materials. So only 2 of the original 24 references to non-human intelligence, which is a huge amount, made it into the final legislation. Similarly, only 2 references to technologies of unknown origin. This is from a report by Gary Hesseltine in UFO Truth magazine, number 64. Still, again, as I say, a lot of them, people are, they now want this information coming out. So this is Rear Admiral Tim Galladay, retired. He says, I am totally convinced that we're experiencing a non-human higher intelligence. I'm completely convinced because I know the people who were in the government programs, the legacy programs, that oversaw both the crash retrieval and just the analysis of UAP data. And I'm very confident in these people, former intelligence, former DOD, and we are working as a team behind the scenes to advance disclosure. A controlled disclosure, mind you, as was put forth in the Schumer Amendment. And he's also said openly, that was in March this year, 2024, and he also said we're being visited by non-human intelligence with technology we really don't understand and with intentions we don't understand either. So these are, people high levels in the military that are now openly speaking about this subject. So then information came out that of the current group that are part of the crash retrievals. Now, clearly, at least since Roswell and before, of course, David Grusch talks about 1933 in Italy, a craft was retrieved. But at least 9 human craft have been recovered by the US government, some wrecked from a crash, and 2 completely intact. The CIA has a system in place that can discern UFOs while they're still cloaked, that they've advanced the technology enough now to actually see them. And special military units are sent to salvage the wreckage, sources said. So 3 sources briefed on these alleged top-secret operations told, in this case, dailymail.com, that the Office of Global Access, a wing of the CIA, excuse me, I think it's using the word CIA, that always happens. Every time. Science and Technology Directorate has played a central role since 2003 in orchestrating the collection of what could be alien spacecraft. So then, in end of Feb, the Pentagon basically reported and said that there's no evidence of an alien cover-up. So via one of their departments, which is called the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, a Pentagon report says there is no evidence of UFO back engineering program. However, Ross Coulthard is talking directly to multiple people in the legacy retrieval program, the reverse engineering program that's being secretly operated within the US government and private aerospace. The Pentagon is trying to stop this issue being discussed any further. And so this was in March now. And as he says, Ross has actually obtained the names and roles of members of AARO's secret advisory committee that pulled the strings on for the Pentagon report. And he says they are the gatekeepers to this legacy program. People are so angry, they are now leaking information. So again, a lot of these whistleblowers now are starting to get really, really angry that this carries on being covered up, even though they're giving a huge amount of personal testimony about this. And then one of the leading figures in Congress, Republican Tim Burchett and a few others that are speaking out openly about this now. So this was in 21 May 2024. He's a member of the House Oversight Committee. He filed the UAP Transparency Act and says, let them vote against it, because if they vote against it, what do they got to hide? They keep saying they don't exist. Give us the information then. Tell us what you're spending tens of millions of dollars on. One UAP object flew just 14 foot away from the canopy of a military jet, and that was the one that I spoke of a little while ago. A former admiral, also who you've just seen, is telling me something's under the water, travelling at 200 miles an hour, as big as a football pitch. This is underwater. We are told they have recovery units. What the heck are they recovering? And then he also says, it won't upset my religious beliefs. I still believe Jesus died on the cross for me. This universe is a lot bigger than we give it credit for. So there's a massive debate going on over there at the moment. Now, this is Dr. Stephen Greer. Again, most of you will know of him as part of the Disclosure Project over many decades, from the original 2001 disclosure. Also, obviously, the CE5 protocols. But he has like well over 700 people from high levels of military and government that want to give their personal testimony openly. He's briefed people at the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, the Pentagon, and in fact at the Vatican as well, which is interesting about this subject. And but he has recently set up what's called DPIA, which is the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, which is basically a comprehensive database devoted to UFO and ET research. This vast repository, filled with unique and largely undiscovered content, is set to welcome public access and contributions. And basically, he's sort of putting everything that he's got, out online. It's going to be one of the biggest online sites of all of this information. He also, his most recent documentary was called The Lost Century, which was basically talking about the technology that for 100 years we have not been allowed to have because of UFO technology, or just advanced, 0 points or free energies, that would liberate humanity from, this constant technology that just keeps us in debt all the time, basically. That is one of the major reasons why I think this technology is being withheld. But he's now talking about the fact that there's going to be this catastrophic disclosure. Dr. Stephen Greer has identified over 700 high-level government and corporate whistleblowers willing to testify regarding the UFO ET issue. DPIA will become one of the largest online sites, which should be up and running now, containing some of the most important UAP information regarding recent retrievals, underground bases, and man-made UAPs. But what's important of this is that they're organising 24-hour legal protection for whistleblowers wanting to talk, so this is separate from government, supposedly from 20th of June onwards, so that people such as operators at black ops sites dealing with UAP, people working in underground bases with retrieved ET material, or even corporations constructing advanced energy and propulsion systems can openly speak out now, without imprisonment. They're protected under this legal protection. Dr. Greer says that some black ops tech have the ability to see cloaked craft to then target them. So again, there's this warfare element going on here where they're actually targeting craft from presumably other worlds that are coming here. He says that a catastrophic disclosure is about to happen, which will be all at once. When the Senate bill was pushed out in December 23 that I showed you, the amnesty or safe harbour clause was taken out. That was the final straw for some of these guys. He says that the people are going to do disclosure. So it's and that's again the ethos here is that it's us, not the governments, waiting for a prime minister or a president to do disclosure. And then sort of coming to the end of this section, this is only 3 weeks ago, on the 8th of July 2024, the Daniel Sheehan, who is the legal counsel for many of the whistleblowers or those that have done the disclosure, as I say, this was just 3 weeks ago, he says that the Senate Intelligence Committee has now secured the testimony under oath of over 40 people who were directly involved in the UFO, UAP, reverse engineering and crash retrieval program. They have cleared David Grusch to testify in public in Congress that we were in possession of more than one extraterrestrial non-human spacecraft, and the biological evidence establishing that the occupants of the craft were non-human. That info has been cleared by the US Defense Department Office of Pre-Publication Review so that they can speak out. 2 of the craft they recovered were fully functional. That doesn't mean they know how to fly them, he said. those craft, they appear to be navigated telepathically. Now, to me, that's probably one of the most important aspects of all of this. It was said, like, there were people that spoke out decades ago that some of the early craft that were retrieved, so, from Roswell onwards, the functioning craft, that they actually, the Black Ops military, they actually wanted psychics to operate these craft because they were much more adept at being able to interact with the craft itself. So it wasn't just, gear sticks, and this was, it was up to the level where the craft itself was able to link directly with the pilot through telepathy. So this is a really powerful testimony for this to be spoken of again, recently. So this is Colonel Philip Corso. He was on President Eisenhower's National Security Council, and Eisenhower was one of the presidents who met human-type ETs back in 1954 and 1955 at Muroc and then Holloman Air Force Base. So in the early 60s, not long after that, Corso was tasked with seeding some of the technology from the crashed UFO at Roswell into mainstream industry that I mentioned earlier on. And again, this was using government contracting programs to bring in, like, say, silicon chip, fiber optics, etc. But again, this was for corporate, for their benefit, not really for ours. It was never about liberating us. And I sort of want to highlight that fact because there's this is the corporate side of this, and this is actually a good way of highlighting it. This is the B-2 bomber. Just one of these costs $2 billion. That is the equivalent of about 1.6 billion pounds. So if you think that the average salary in this country is probably, say, £25,000, it would take you at that salary 63,000 years to be able to buy one of these aircraft. I keep doing that figure because I cannot believe it would take you that long. But this is why the money involved and the corporations involved, the financing of the military, etc., is so off the scale, and that they don't want that stopping. So, but there's also an incredible aspect to this as well. This is the stealth fighter. This is a picture that I took in 1992, just after the first Gulf War. And there were rumours that there was some sort of UFO technology in the stealth fighter. Now they fly with normal sort of aerodynamics per se, but they have very advanced computing systems. So whether it was part of the computing software. But what is fascinating is that the B-2 was developed by Northrop Grumman. This was developed by Lockheed Martin at the Skunk Works. Now, in March 23, 1993, Ben Rich, who headed the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, which developed the stealth aircraft, he actually gave a presentation to the Engineering Alumni Association at University of California in LA, of which he was an alumnus. And he said, we already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do. He concluded his presentation by announcing, we now have the technology to take ET home. This is 1993. After the presentation, he said, regarding the possibility of us traveling to the stars, it won't take someone's lifetime to do it. There is an error in the equations, and we know what it is, and we now have the capability to travel to the stars. He was then asked by a delegate, Jan Hazen, Ben, what equations are you talking about? How does UFO propulsion work? Rich said, let me ask you, how does ESP work? Jan replied without thinking, all points in time and space are connected. Rich shot back, that's how it works. So again, this was highlighting, I mentioned about the telepathic side of this, but they were realizing that this technology, it's all about, consciousness and sort of psychic abilities and, even the warping of space-time. It's way beyond nuts and bolts technology. And this sort of fits in with this. This is Edgar Mitchell, who already spoke out. I said about Gordon Cooper. He spoke out saying that we all know that UFOs exist. What we need to know is, where do they come from, and what do they want? But it's interesting because he, on one trip in space, he had a profound experience of feeling interconnected to everything he was observing from the window of the space capsule. The stars, the moon, the blue planet, and the vastness of the cosmos. He quickly realized that in order to explain such an extraordinary experience, and others like it, there would need to be a rapprochement, friendly relations, between the scientific, like left brain, and spiritual interpretations, right brain, of reality. Dr. Mitchell saw a need to reconcile his training as an engineer and astrophysicist with the wisdom of the ages, to transcend the limitations of what he saw as an outdated materialistic worldview. A new framework would be needed, one that could help explain the unexplainable and spark transformation. So he actually set up the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and noetic basically means inner wisdom, direct knowing, intuition, implicit understanding. And in fact, that IONS now has one of the world's largest teams of multidisciplinary scientists conducting research on frontier topics in consciousness and its impact in our lives. He said, we need to make the world safe for creativity and intuition, for it's creativity and intuition that will make the world safe for us. And this is where I love this quote. This is from the brilliant Nikola Tesla, where he said, the day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in 1 decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence. Now, at least you can see that. So this is the exquisite crop formation that appeared at Martinsell Hill in 2009 in Wiltshire. I started studying the crop formations from 1995 onwards, and part of one of the early research groups. But I particularly love this one. I regularly talk about crop formations in talks, but the reason I normally talk about this one is because it relates to what I call crop-specific formations. So like those that are, it's only the particular crop that's laid, so like wheat in this particular case. So I've seen them myself and other people have as well, that where some formations, which I would call the genuine formations, not the hoax ones, only the particular crop is laid. So if there are like weeds or poppies or possibly seeds from the year before, so like barley, they remain standing. And it's pretty amazing. So it's as though the technology is so advanced that can actually allocate specifically wheat to lay. It's truly profound. But the reason I use this in relation to this talk is to highlight where I feel we are at that sort of, where the arrow is on the right-hand side, we are at that line, basically. So if you're standing against the fence in the grass, I feel we are at this point in time, which Paulden was just talking about, where it's like 8 billion people are all in a line with all of our history behind us, all of our knowledge, but with the sort of misdirections and deceptions that we're getting through the media now with AI and deep faking. It's really hard for people to know what's going on. You've got depression and sickness and sadness, interference from electromagnetic frequencies, and we're in this sort of state up against. I feel like we're really up against this wall now. Whether that wall is the veil, but that it is our birthright to be able to go beyond that, to transcend that. And it's like as if you then can look at the magnificence of this formation as true reality beyond. We have the right to be able to evolve. Now I show this as an example of that, where the third dimensional plane is so incredibly dense, and in this case you've got these two parents that have lost their child, and the great sadness and the bereaving for their loss. But the truth is that of course the soul has actually left the child and is now being welcomed up into heaven by, in this case, an angel. or it could be loved ones that have already passed over, or beings of light. And of course, this happens at the end of every life, when we leave the body. But there seems to be something more than just that normal process at the moment, as though we're sort of cramming up against this wall, ready for this massive evolution, which I feel is coming. So, just about to conclude, I use this montage as a way of highlighting that we are. This is such a beautiful world. It's so incredible. Speaking in the middle part of this, which is all about those alphabet agencies and stuff. We've so got to move beyond that. This is an incredible planet, so beautiful, for so many people, different cultures, colours, religions or not. But I believe that we're all souls incarnate with this incredible opportunity that we have to experience this earth plane in its myriad forms. But basically, there should be no division. We are all this family of souls on earth. So, just to finish off this talk, I'd like to just read these words. That we are more than just the physical, that we affect the world around us even by our thoughts. That this time on earth is known about, and we have help and guidance as we go through these changes, and are not alone in these endeavours. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen Foster.